My name is Eliza Vance, and for the past 10 years, I've been the quiet engine keeping Vance Timber and Mill running. Our family business, nestled in the rainy, timber rich foothills of Oregon, was my grandfather's legacy, passed down to my father, Edward. While dad handled the big picture, client dinners, industry handshakes, and my mother, Beatrice, managed the social aspects of the business, mostly redecorating the main office, I was the one deep in the daily grind. Office manager, bookkeeper, logistics coordinator, whatever title they gave me, the reality was the same. I handled payroll, balanced the books, chased invoices, scheduled deliveries, dealt with the county permits, basically everything that kept the lights on and the lumber moving. It wasn't glamorous work, especially compared to the path chosen by my older sister, Seraphina. Seraphina was the designated star. Beautiful, charismatic, armed with a marketing degree and an endless stream of visionary ideas for rebranding the mill. Ideas that usually involved expensive consultants and yielded little practical return. While I ensured paychecks cleared and timber shipments arrived on time, Seraphina flitted between extended networking trips and vague creative development projects, always lauded by mom and dad as the future of Vance Timber. My own contributions? Overlooked, taken for granted. My suggestions for implementing sustainable forestry practices or modernizing our outdated accounting system were politely dismissed. Too complicated right now, Eliza, Dad would say. Let's stick with what works. The times I used my own modest savings to cover payroll during lean months or fronted the cash for emergency equipment repairs were framed as simple family duty. I was the reliable daughter, the practical one, the invisible cog ensuring the family machine kept running so Seraphina could be the shiny hood ornament. Resentment simmered, but loyalty, or perhaps just ingrained habit, kept me showing up, kept me managing the details they couldn't be bothered with. My parents were nearing retirement age, and the unspoken assumption, fueled by years of blatant favoritism, was that Seraphina would inherit controlling interest, perhaps even sole ownership, of Vance Timber and Mill and the associated family properties, including the beloved lake house my grandfather built. I expected to be sidelined, perhaps offered a continued management role with a condescending title. I didn't expect outright erasure. The discovery happened on a Tuesday evening. I was working late at the mill office, reconciling end of quarter accounts and reviewing recent property tax filings, tasks Dad had happily offloaded onto me years ago. Something felt off with the property tax assessments. The parcel identification numbers for the main mill property and the lake house property seemed linked to a different ownership structure than I remembered from previous year's filings. Curiosity piqued, my bookkeeper's brain demanding clarity. I logged into the county recorder's online database. I pulled up the records for the Vance Timber and Mill property first. My breath caught. Filed just 3 months ago. A quitclaim deed transferring full ownership from the Edward and Beatrice Vance Family Trust directly to Seraphina Vance, trustee of the Seraphina Vance Irrevocable Trust. No co-ownership, no mention of other beneficiaries, just Seraphina. My hands started to shake. Maybe it was just the business. Maybe the personal properties were different. Trembling slightly, I typed in the parcel ID for the lake house, the place filled with my happiest childhood memories, the place my grandfather always said represented the true heart of the Vance legacy. The result loaded. Another quitclaim deed. Same filing date. Same notary stamp. Transferring the lake house property solely, entirely to Seraphina Vance. I stared at the screen, the stark digital letters blurring through a sudden film of tears. They had done it. Secretly, quietly behind my back, while I was busy running the very business that funded their lives, my parents and sister had systematically transferred everything into Seraphina's name, effectively disinheriting me, erasing me from my own family's legacy without a word. The casual cruelty of it, the calculated deception, it felt like a physical blow. All those years of quiet sacrifice, of putting the family first, of swallowing my own ambitions to keep the mill afloat, rendered meaningless. I wasn't just the overlooked daughter anymore. I was the dispossessed one. Why hadn't they told me? Why the secrecy? A cold dread began to replace the initial shock. What else were they hiding? My mind flashed back years to my grandfather's study shortly after he passed. I remembered helping my father sort through boxes of old papers. There had been discussions about trusts, about ensuring the business stayed in the family, about providing for both granddaughters. Had those wishes been ignored or deliberately subverted? I thought of Judge Harrison, retired Judge Harrison now, a close friend of my grandfather's, the sharp, kind man who had helped Grandpa Vance set up the original family trusts and navigate the complex legalities of the timber business decades ago. He lived quietly now back in Portland, but his mind, I knew, was still razor sharp. He had always treated me with respect, unlike my own parents. Maybe, maybe he would remember something. Maybe he could offer some clarity, some legal perspective beyond the raw wound of this betrayal. Before doubt could take root, I acted. I meticulously saved encrypted copies of the deeds I found online, noting the filing dates, the ridiculously low transfer values listed, gift. The notary's name? Chloe Dubois. The name sounded vaguely familiar, possibly one of Seraphina's college friends. More evidence to file away. I shut down my work computer, the familiar hum of the mill office suddenly feeling alien, hostile. Locking the door behind me, I walked out into the cool Oregon night, the scent of pine and damp earth doing little to soothe the turmoil inside me. I didn't go home to my small apartment above the town bookstore. Instead, I drove towards Portland, towards Judge Harrison's quiet residential street, fueled by a desperate need for answers and a burgeoning cold resolve. They thought they could erase me quietly. They thought the dutiful daughter, the quiet office manager, would simply accept her fate, fade into the background. They forgot who taught me about ledgers, about paper trails, about the enduring power of verifiable facts. They forgot whose blood, whose legacy of quiet strength, also ran through my veins. My grandfather's. The fight wasn't just for my inheritance anymore. It was for his memory, his intentions. And I wouldn't let them erase that too. The drive to Portland felt surreal, fueled by coffee and cold determination. Judge Harrison, retired now but still sharp as a tack, lived in a quiet neighborhood with sprawling oak trees, a far cry from the industrial hum of the Vance Timber Mill. He had been my grandfather's confidant, the architect of the legal structures meant to protect the family legacy. If anyone knew the truth behind the mill's founding documents, it was him. He greeted me at the door himself, his handshake firm, his eyes kind but assessing. "Eliza," he said, ushering me into his sunlit study lined with law books and photos of grandchildren. "It's been too long. What brings you all the way down here on such short notice?" I didn't waste time. Laying out the copies of the recent deeds I'd found, the mill, the land, the lake house, all transferred solely to Seraphina. I explained my discovery, the secrecy, the feeling of being deliberately cut out. I spoke calmly, sticking to the facts, the dates, the document numbers, suppressing the tremor of betrayal in my voice. Judge Harrison listened intently, his expression shifting from polite interest to concerned gravity, then finally to a deep, troubled frown. He steepled his fingers, staring at the deeds. "Edward and Beatrice did this? Without consulting you? Without adhering to the original trust structure?" He sounded genuinely dismayed. "That wasn't your grandfather's intention, Eliza. Not at all." He stood abruptly and walked over to a tall metal filing cabinet tucked away in a corner. "Your grandfather," he said, pulling out a thick, dust-covered folder labeled Vance Estate, Original Trust, "was a meticulous man, and a fair one. He foresaw potential complications down the line. Let's see what his own words say." He carefully opened the aged folder on his large mahogany desk. Inside were documents far older, thicker, bearing my grandfather's distinctive signature alongside Judge Harrison's own. He located the primary Vance family trust document, established decades ago when the mill was first incorporated. He smoothed out the page, his finger tracing the dense legal text. "Here it is," he murmured, adjusting his reading glasses. "Article 4, Section B, Beneficiaries upon final distribution." He looked up at me over the rim of his glasses. "As I recall, and as it clearly states here, Upon the retirement or death of both Edward and Beatrice Vance, the primary assets, specifically defined as Vance Timber and Mill operating shares in the Cedar Lake property, are to be divided equally, 50-50, between his granddaughters, Eliza Vance and Seraphina Vance. Tears pricked my eyes, blurring the text. It was true. What I had always vaguely understood, what felt intuitively right, was written here in black and white. I was supposed to inherit half. My parents and Seraphina hadn't just sidelined me, they had actively worked to subvert my grandfather's explicit wishes. But, Judge, I managed, my voice thick, these new deeds, they seem legally filed, signed by my parents. Ah, he said, flipping further into the original trust document, his finger stopping on a different section. But your grandfather was shrewder than they might remember. He worried about undue influence, perhaps. Look here. Article 7, Addendum C. He added this shortly before he passed, after Edward had that first health scare. He turned the document so I could read it clearly. It was a handwritten codicil, initialed by my grandfather and witnessed by Judge Harrison himself. Notwithstanding any subsequent amendments executed solely by Edward or Beatrice Vance, it read, final transfer or sale of the primary assets defined in Article 4, Section B, Vance Timber and Mill shares and Cedar Lake property, shall require the express written consent of the younger granddaughter, Eliza Vance, until said granddaughter reaches the age of 35 years. My jaw dropped. Veto power until I turned 35? My 35th birthday was less than 6 months away. Your grandfather trusted your judgment, Eliza, Judge Harrison said quietly. He admired your head for business, even when you were young. He worried Edward might be too easily swayed, or that Beatrice, well, he worried. He put this clause in as a final safeguard, ensuring you had a say, ensuring things couldn't be drastically changed without your consent until you were older, more established. He looked at me pointedly. This clause, Eliza, if still legally binding, and I see no reason why it wouldn't be, given it predates any trust amendments they made, effectively gives you the power to block those recent transfers to Seraphina. He made certified copies of the original trust and the crucial addendum from his files, pressing them into my hands. Get yourself a good litigator, Eliza, he advised sternly. Someone specializing in trust disputes and fiduciary duty. Present this evidence. Your parents and sister have acted improperly, possibly fraudulently, and certainly against your grandfather's documented wishes. Don't let them erase you. I left Judge Harrison's house feeling like I could finally breathe again, armed not just with righteous anger, but with legal standing. The grandfather I adored had left me one final gift: the power to protect his legacy and my own place within it. Back home, fueled by this new knowledge, I focused my investigation. The Cedar Lake property deed transfer, filed 3 months ago while Dad was recovering from a minor stroke, felt particularly suspicious. The notary was listed as Chloe Dubois. A quick online search confirmed my vague recollection. Chloe was Seraphina's sorority sister from college, now running a mobile notary service. Plausible enough, except I cross-referenced the notarization date on the deed with Chloe Dubois' very public Instagram feed. On that exact date, Chloe had posted multiple photos tagged from Cabo San Lucas, Mexico, celebrating her own birthday. There was no way she could have physically notarized my father's signature in Oregon on that day. It wasn't just suspicious anymore. It was blatant fraud. Forgery. My mother must have signed my father's name, and Seraphina must have gotten her friend Chloe to notarize it remotely or backdate it, likely assuming I, the overlooked office manager, would never dig deep enough to check county records or cross-reference Instagram vacation photos. The pieces clicked into place, forming an ugly picture of calculated deceit. It was time to lawyer up. I researched attorneys specializing in trust litigation in Oregon. One name stood out: Ms. Evelyn Reed. Known for her sharp mind, meticulous preparation, and a reputation for taking on complex family estate battles and winning. Our initial consultation felt like exhaling a breath I'd been holding for years. I laid out everything: my discovery of the transfers at work, Judge Harrison's findings, the original trust, the grandfather's veto clause, the suspicious lake house deed, the evidence of Chloe Dubois being out of the country on the notarization date. Ms. Reed listened impassively, reviewing the documents with focused intensity. When I finished, she looked up, a glint of steel in her eyes. Ms. Vance, she said coolly, based on this evidence, particularly the original trust document, and your grandfather's clearly worded veto clause combined with the strong indicators of fraud surrounding the lake house deed transfer, you have an exceptionally strong case. They have violated the terms of the original trust, breached their fiduciary duty as trustees, and likely committed forgery and notary fraud. She agreed to take my case immediately. Our strategy wasn't to rush into court, however. First, Miss Reed advised, we issue a formal demand letter and request an immediate meeting. We present our findings, invoke your grandfather's clause, and demand they nullify the transfers to Seraphina and restore the original trust provisions. We give them one chance to rectify this amicably before we initiate litigation, including reporting the potential fraud. As we finalized the plan, my phone buzzed. A text from Seraphina. Heard you were digging around old papers. Don't make this messy, Eliza. Accept things gracefully. Followed minutes later by a voicemail from Mom. Eliza, honey, please don't listen to old lawyers stirring up trouble. We did what was best for the business, for Seraphina's future. Just let it go. Their attempts at intimidation and manipulation only solidified my resolve. I forwarded both to Ms. Reed's office. Add these to the file, I typed. Seems they know we're onto them. The meeting was scheduled for the following Friday at the Vance Timber and Mill conference room. Their territory, but this time, I wouldn't be the quiet office manager taking notes. I would be the rightful heir, armed with the truth, my grandfather's wishes, and a very sharp lawyer. The timber might belong to the Vances, but the integrity of the trust belonged to justice. And I was ready to fight for it. The Vance Timber and Mill conference room felt smaller, stuffier than usual when Miss Evelyn Reed and I walked in the following Friday afternoon. The long oak table, usually reserved for meetings with major suppliers or forestry officials, felt like a courtroom bench. My parents, Edward and Beatrice, sat stiffly on one side, their faces grim. Seraphina sat beside them, radiating nervous energy beneath a veneer of forced nonchalance, tapping her pen rhythmically against a leather-bound notepad. They hadn't brought their own lawyer, a sign of either supreme arrogance or dawning panic. I wasn't sure which. Ms. Reed calmly took the seat opposite them, placing her structured briefcase on the table with a soft click. I sat beside her, my own binder filled with neatly organized evidence resting before me. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken accusations. Thank you for agreeing to meet, Ms. Reed began, her voice calm, professional, cutting through the tension. We requested this meeting to discuss significant discrepancies discovered regarding the recent transfers of assets previously held by the Edward and Beatrice Vance Family Trust, specifically Vance Timber and Mill shares and the Cedar Lake property. Discrepancies? Seraphina scoffed, leaning forward. Everything was handled perfectly legally, Ms. Reed. Dad and Mom simply updated their estate plan to reflect current realities. Indeed? Ms. Reed raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. She slid a certified copy of the original Vance family trust document, provided by Judge Harrison, across the table. Perhaps you could clarify how the current reality necessitated deviating from Article 4, Section B of this foundational document, established by the late Mr. Vance Sr. and witnessed by Judge Harrison, which clearly stipulates a 50-50 division of primary assets between his granddaughters, Eliza Vance and Seraphina Vance, upon the retirement or death of Edward and Beatrice. I watched their faces. Seraphina's eyes widened slightly. She clearly hadn't expected me to have obtained that. My mother's lips thinned into a tight line. My father looked down at the table. That was an older version, Beatrice stammered finally. Arthur, Edward, and I updated it. Seraphina has been much more involved in the business lately. Involved enough to intercept certified mail addressed to her sister containing legal notifications regarding that update? Ms. Reed countered smoothly, referencing Mr. Finch's earlier attempt to send me the paperwork. And involved enough, she continued, sliding across a copy of the recent Cedar Lake property deed transfer, To arrange for this document to be notarized by your college friend, Ms. Chloe Dubois? She paused, then added pointedly, a notary whose own public travel records and social media confirm she was enjoying margaritas in Cabo San Lucas on the exact date this Oregon deed was supposedly signed and notarized in her presence, while Mr. Edward Vance, she glanced sympathetically towards my father, was documented as being hospitalized recovering from a minor stroke? Seraphina gasped. My mother looked horrified, not at the potential forgery I suspected, but at being caught so blatantly. My father simply closed his eyes. This deed, therefore, Ms. Reed stated flatly, is highly questionable, likely fraudulent, and certainly invalidatable in court, as is the transfer of the mill shares executed under similar duress or potential incapacity around the same time frame. You can't prove anything, Seraphina spat, color returning to her face in angry blotches. Dad wanted me to have the business. He knew Eliza wasn't capable. Actually, Ms. Reed said, leaning back slightly, we don't necessarily need to prove forgery at this stage, although the evidence is compelling. She tapped the original trust document Judge Harrison had unearthed. Because your grandfather, Ms. Vance, she looked directly at me now, then back at my stunned family, was a remarkably prescient man. She flipped to the page containing the codicil. Article 7, Addendum C, she read aloud, her voice clear and steady. Notwithstanding any subsequent amendments executed solely by Edward or Beatrice Vance, final transfer or sale of the primary assets defined in Article 4, Section B, Vance Timber and Mill shares and Cedar Lake property, shall require the express written consent of the younger granddaughter, Eliza Vance, until said granddaughter reaches the age of 35 years. Ms. Reed looked up, her gaze sharp. My client, Ms. Eliza Vance, turns 35 in approximately. She glanced at her notes. 5 months and 2 weeks. According to the foundational, legally binding trust established by your own father and grandfather, Mr. Vance, she addressed my father directly now. None of the recent transfers of the mill or the lake house to Ms. Seraphina Vance are valid without Ms. Eliza Vance's explicit written consent. Consent which was never sought. And, she added coolly, most certainly never given. The heir left the room. Seraphina stared, mouth agape, the implications finally crashing down. My mother looked like she might faint. My father simply looked defeated. Their entire scheme, their secret maneuvering, their attempt to write me out of my own family legacy, all rendered null and void by a forgotten clause, a grandfather's final safeguard. What do you want? Seraphina whispered finally, her earlier arrogance completely gone. I spoke then, my voice quiet but firm, taking control of the narrative for the first time in my life within these office walls. I want, I said, meeting my sister's panicked gaze, then my parents' stunned ones. What grandfather intended. An equal share, equal partnership, equal respect. I looked at the evidence Miss Reed had laid out. And I want the fraudulent lake house deed immediately rescinded and retitled, according to the original trust, naming both Seraphina and myself as future beneficiaries. Furthermore, I continued, feeling a surge of strength I hadn't known I possessed, effective immediately. As 50% beneficiary with impending control rights, I expect full transparency and involvement in all major business decisions at Vance Timber and Mill. Their lawyer, had they brought one, would have advised immediate compliance, facing irrefutable proof of violating the original trust, evidence of potential forgery, and the power of the grandfather's clause. They had no legal recourse. They knew it. After a tense negotiation managed entirely by Ms. Reed, documents were drawn up nullifying the recent transfers to Seraphina and reaffirming the terms of the original trust, acknowledging my 50% stake and my rights under the grandfather's clause. The power dynamic within Vance Timber and Mill shifted seismically that afternoon. In the months that followed, I didn't just take my seat at the table, I started rebuilding it according to a different blueprint. Armed with my intimate knowledge of the mill's operations, gleaned from years managing things behind the scenes, and my long-ignored ideas, I began implementing changes. I brought in forestry consultants to develop sustainable harvesting plans, updated the archaic bookkeeping systems, invested in safer, more efficient equipment, and started exploring markets for ethically sourced, locally milled timber, honoring the respect for the land I knew my grandfather possessed, values my parents and Seraphina had dismissed in pursuit of easier profits. Seraphina resisted initially, then, facing the reality of shared control and my undeniable competence, retreated into managing the superficial marketing aspects she actually understood. My parents, stripped of their ultimate authority by their own failed scheme, became largely irrelevant to the mill's operations. They remained in the family home, but the atmosphere was irrevocably altered. I kept the lake house key, the property now secured under the trust, according to my grandfather's original wishes. Visiting it alone a few weeks after the confrontation felt like stepping back in time. I found a hidden box in my grandfather's old desk drawer. Inside, not legal documents, but a collection of my childhood drawings of trees, carefully preserved, and a small folded note in his familiar hand, apparently written shortly after he added that final clause to the trust. For Ellie, may you always protect the roots and have the courage to choose your own direction. Love, Grandpa. Tears welled as I held the note. He had seen me. He had trusted me, even then. Sitting on the porch of the lake house, watching the sunset paint the Oregon water in shades of rose and gold, I felt a quiet sense of peace settle over me. This wasn't the future I had envisioned 10 years ago when I was just the overlooked office manager. The path had been painful, fraught with betrayal, but I had navigated it. I'd found the truth in the archives, asserted my rights, and in doing so, reclaimed not just my inheritance, but my voice, my place, my power. Vance Timber and Mill would continue, perhaps stronger, more ethical than before. And I, Eliza Vance, the quiet granddaughter, was finally home, ready to tend the legacy on my own terms.